today's video, we're going to talk about the difference between macronutrient tracking and intuitive eating. Hello everyone, my name is Bianca and welcome to my channel. So this channel so far has focused mostly on exercise, movement, workouts, because that really is my field of expertise. I have a degree in exercise science and currently in physical therapy. So movement is really where I thrive. It's really where I have the most knowledge that I want to share, and I want to make sure that the things that I say on this channel and the things that I promote on this channel are things that, first of all, I really believe in, and second of all, I know that I am in a good position to actually be talking about it. I really want this channel to be based on science because I believe that is what the fitness and the health industry in general should be based off. With that being said, today's video is going to be focused more on the nutrition aspect of health and fitness because it is a huge part of reaching your fitness goals, developing a healthier lifestyle, all of that. I do though want to say that I am not a dietitian, I'm not a nutritionist, but I do have knowledge in nutrition because in my exercise science degree, I did take nutrition classes, and more specifically, nutrition when it comes to athletes, exercise science, and overall performance. So that is why the advice that I'm going to be giving today is mostly for people that are healthy, that have no medical conditions, and that are just trying to better their health, better their fitness, and reach their fitness goals. In today's video, we're going to talk about the difference between macronutrient tracking and intuitive eating to help you achieve your goals. So we're obviously going to start off by defining what macronutrients are, because I know that it's not necessarily common knowledge for everyone. And if you're going to be tracking calories and tracking macronutrients, you need to know what those macronutrients are. And then we're also going to talk about different ways that you can still try to be aware of what you're eating and try to track what you're eating without even looking at calories or macronutrients, simply by using different intuitive eating techniques. So if that's something you're interested in, then stick around and we're gonna get right to it. All right, so macronutrients. We have three different types of macronutrients. We have carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. They all have different roles in our body, and they each have the reason for why we take them and why all three of them are important. I do not agree with any type of diet that involves either completely or almost completely removing any of these categories. Our body needs all of them. First things first, let's start with carbohydrates. So carbs are our body's main energy source. It's what our body uses most readily when it needs energy for everything, from just basal metabolic needs to exercise to digesting to everything. Carbs are the #1 source that our body uses, and carbohydrates are also the only source that our brain is able to use for energy. Then moving on, we have fats. Fats are also incredibly important for your immunity. They are the basis for your body being able to produce hormones, and they are also really important for some nutrient absorption. Some vitamins and minerals that we intake, our body actually needs fats in order to be able to process them fully so we can benefit from those nutrients. And then we have protein. So protein is the foundation, the building block of every single tissue in our body. Every single tissue is made of different chains of amino acids which form proteins. So that is why protein is so important when you're trying to put on muscle, because without that protein, your body doesn't have those little individual blocks to be able to put them together to produce increased tissue mass. So I'm sure that you can see how, with all of those having different needs in our body, why it's so important to make sure that we have a balanced diet that includes every single one of those macronutrients. All right, so next we're going to get into what is, in my opinion, the different pros and cons of macronutrient and calorie tracking. Before we continue any further, I'm thinking of making another video very shortly about the easiest ways and the most efficient ways to actually track your macronutrients if you're interested in it, because it can seem simple to say, yeah, just track your calories, track your macronutrients in an app, but it can be so overwhelming and daunting when you actually start that if you have failed with it in the past, or if it feels scary for you to try, let me know in the comments below so that I make that video to give you guys all the tools you need for that. All right, so we're gonna start with the pros first. There are two main pros, in my opinion, for calorie and macronutrient tracking. #1 is all the knowledge that you're going to gain from it. We live in a society where overeating and big portions is what we want, is what we look for. When you go to restaurants, most of the time you're going to be given a portion size that is double probably what your body actually needs, and that's what we're used to, and we like it because we like getting more for our money, let's say. So a lot of people don't actually know what a portion size is. A lot of people don't know how many fats might be in a food, how many carbs might be in a food. It's okay. It is a bit overwhelming, and if you've never actually looked into it, it's normal that you don't quite know what is in what and how much and things like that. So that's why calorie tracking, macronutrient tracking can be such an incredible tool. I honestly would recommend it to most of my clients, never as a long-term thing. Calorie tracking, macronutrient tracking is not a lifestyle. It is simply a tool to use towards building a healthier lifestyle. And so I would recommend it, either do it for 3-4 weeks every single day to get a really good idea, or do it a couple days a week for a few months, or whichever way you think might work best for you. I think it can give you so much information. It might make you realize, okay, I really was lacking protein in my diet. I had no idea. Or I really am over-consuming carbs and fats every single day. Or I don't eat enough fiber. Or, it can just give you so much information about your habits that you might not know. So if you've been trying for a long time to either put on muscle, lose fat, overall change your body composition, and you never quite seem to be able to get there, even though you put in a lot of work, maybe there are things that you are not even aware that you are doing wrong that could be fixed simply by being more aware and looking at those numbers. And then pro number 2 goes along with number 1, is that it is simply more efficient for reaching your goals. There's no way around it. Numbers are always going to be more exact than intuitive eating is. If you're just someone who likes to be efficient and know exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it, then of course calorie and macronutrient tracking is always going to be more spot on. All right, so now let's get into the cons. There are 3 main cons for me. Number 1 is that I can totally see how calorie tracking and macronutrient tracking can lead to someone becoming a little overly obsessed, and how it can even lead to disordered eating if it's all you can think about. And especially if either you're doing it by yourself or you're doing it with a coach that is pushing you to extremes, I can see how it can be really detrimental for you. So make sure that calorie tracking and macronutrient tracking is never for the purpose of making sure that you are being super restrictive, or there should be nothing negative about it. To me, it should be simply about gaining more knowledge. If you have a coach that's telling you, start macronutrient tracking to make sure that you don't eat almost any carbs or almost any fats, then once again, it is not a mentality where I think calorie tracking and macronutrient tracking is going to be beneficial, because you're not using it as a lifestyle tool. You're using it as something short term to be extreme and get fast results that are not sustainable. If you're going to use it, make sure that you use it for something that's sustainable. So if you're using it to make sure that you get the right proportions of each macronutrient and the overall right amount in a day, then that is sustainable. That is knowledge you're going to be able to take with you for the rest of your life. Con number 2 is that it can be confusing and it can be difficult and it can be just overwhelming to know where to start, how to measure, what's 15 grams, what's 100 grams. I can understand how it can just seem like a very daunting task. And that is why I said before, if you feel that way about it, let me know in the comments below and I will make that video about all my top tips on how to make calorie and macronutrient tracking easier and more effective. And con number 3 is that it can definitely be time consuming. There's no way around it. Tracking your calories, tracking your macronutrients, weighing stuff, it's always going to take more time than simply cooking and throwing it in a bowl. There's no way around that, honestly, but it can be done, like I said before, in ways that are a little bit more efficient so that you're not spending, 20 minutes trying to figure out what you're eating. So to conclude this little part here, I think you can get from everything that I've just said that I personally think calorie and macronutrient tracking is beneficial, and if you weigh the pros and the cons, to me, for a short-term period, if it is done properly, I think the pros can outweigh the cons. Like I said, please don't ever believe that you have to do this for the rest of your life, and also please don't do it for any reason that feels restrictive or negative to you. Alright, so now if we get into intuitive eating. So the pros and cons for intuitive eating are pretty much, if you take what we just said about macronutrient tracking and switch it around. So the pros are that it's not as time consuming, it's not as difficult, it's not as daunting, but the cons are that it's not as exact, it's not as specific, and you're not necessarily going to be gaining the same amount of information for it. But with that being said, I am going to give 2 different methods that I think can help you be better about intuitive eating, in the sense of how to disperse your different macronutrients without having to actually track them, and also how to get a good idea of what a good portion size for each of those macronutrients is. Okay, so method number 1 is going to be the hand portion guide. So this method of intuitively eating involves using your hand to help gauge portion sizes. The good thing about this is that 1, your hand is pretty portable, so it's with you everywhere you go, and 2, usually your hand is going to be pretty proportional to the rest of your body, so it can give you a pretty good indication of what portion size your body obviously needs. Now, of course, there are limitations and exceptions to this rule, but for the general person, the general population, using your hand for different portion sizes is a pretty good way of going about it. So first things first, if we look at protein with the hand guide, your protein portion is supposed to be the size of your palm and also the width, depth of your palm. So you're supposed to use your palm as a good idea of how much protein you should be having. Now, if we move on to vegetables, you're supposed to use a full fist worth of vegetables on your plate. So once again, it gives you a good idea of the amount and also the sort of height that you can be using. So like I said, really not a very exact science, but visually, if you're looking down at your plate, it can give you a good idea of whether your proportions are at least in the range that they should be at. And lastly, if we move on to starchy vegetables, which are rice, oatmeal, potatoes, pasta, so those more really complex carbs, for that you're supposed to have about a handful like this. I don't know how well you guys can see, but it's supposed to be about a handful. And lastly, they recommend about a thumb's worth of fat, which could be oils, butters, nuts, that kind of stuff. Last thing that I want to mention about this method is that for women, 1 of each of those portions that I just mentioned is what you should be having, and for men it's double. So it's 2 handfuls, 2 fistfuls, 2 palms width for protein. Alright, and now moving on to method number 2. This is a little bit simpler, once again even less precise, I would say. It's just the overall plate visualization. So if you have a plate in front of you, a good general rule is that half of that plate should be vegetables or fruit, depending on what kind of meal you're having, but carbs that are non-starchy, so lighter carbs like fruits and vegetables like I just mentioned. Then you should have about a quarter of your plate, which is the starchy carbs like I mentioned before, and then the other quarter should be protein. Once again, you can have a plate this big, you can have a plate this big. It becomes a little bit hard to determine. So in my opinion, if you're going the intuitive eating route, but you don't have too much knowledge about how many macronutrients are in your food, one good way of going about it is mixing the 2 methods that I just said. So go ahead, use the hand method because it's a little bit more precise and a little bit more individual, while also keeping count of the plate visualization. So if you combine those 2, I think it gives you a pretty good indication of whether you're on the right track. All right, and before we close off this video, now that we've compared a little bit macronutrient tracking and intuitive eating, I just want to give a couple extra tips on overall being more aware of portion sizes, being more aware of what you're putting into your body every single day. First tip is that if you don't want to go into full-blown tracking, that is completely fine. I really understand it's not for everyone, but I would still recommend at least taking some time to do a little bit of research on what starchy carbs are, what proteins are, what different types of fats are. Just get a good idea of at least what foods fall into which category. Because for example, there is a misconception out there that nuts are a protein source. Nuts are not a protein source. Nuts are a fat source. Yes, they do have a little bit of protein, but if you look at the distribution of protein versus fats in nuts, there's a lot more fat than protein. So it's not accurate to say that nut is a protein source. So just little things like that, if you get a better idea of at least what foods fit into what category, it can really help you afterwards. Next tip, and this is a lot more when it comes to portion sizes, is start a bit smaller than you think you need. And I'm talking mostly to people that are already aware that they have a portion issue or that they know that they always tend to overeat. Best advice that I have is really take a little bit less than you normally would, eat that, finish, give yourself 5-10 minutes, see how you feel, and then you can always have more. Another tip, once again, on portion control is to eat a little bit slower. there is a delay between our stomach being full and our stomach actually sending the message to our brain telling us that we're full. And that delay can be pretty long. I think there's research showing that can be 15 to 20 minutes before your brain fully understands how full you are. So if you are used to downing your meals in 5 to 10 minutes, then it's gonna take a lot longer than that for your brain to be like, okay, well, we overate. So just eat a little bit slower, take smaller bites, chew more. It's better for your digestive system anyways to take your time. So there you go. One more tip along those lines is to have a glass of water next to you and take at least a sip or two in between every couple bites. Once again, it's gonna help you slow down. 2, it's gonna help fill you up. And 3, once again, better for your digestive system if you're also hydrated while you're eating. Last tip when it comes to portion control, and we've been saying this for a very, very long time. This is nothing new, but don't eat in front of your TV, don't eat in front of your computer, don't eat when you are overly distracted, because it's gonna take even longer for your brain to actually process the fact that you are full. And one last little thing I wanna mention before closing off, there are many nutrition association groups out there that recommend that we actually try to aim to eat to be 85% full, not 100% full. Because once again, like I mentioned, it does take longer for you to fully process that you're full. So if while you're consuming your meal, you're telling yourself, okay, when I feel about 80 to 85% full, let me stop, odds are that you're actually at your 100%. It's just taking you longer to notice that you got there. So if you also keep that in mind as you're eating, and if you're eating slower and having some water, it should really help with you being able to learn more about your hunger cues and listen a little bit better to what your body's telling you. That is it for today's video. Thank you so much for listening if you've made it this far. And don't forget to let me know in the comments below if you want me to make a video giving all my tips and tricks to how to make tracking a little bit easier and a little bit less daunting. Hope you guys have enjoyed, and I will see you soon.